This is going to be quite a talk. I'm going to dazzle you as only I can dazzle you with artwork that's going to blow your mind. I'm speaking from one verse today and from a single page of notes. Usually that's 45 or 50 pages, and you watch me turn all those pages. Just one page today. And what I just said caused some hope to well up in you, thinking it's going to be short. I will dash your hopes in 5-minute increments, just all throughout this talk. But here's the one verse that I want to draw your attention to today. Galatians 6:9. Do not grow weary in well-doing, for we shall reap a reward if we do not give up. Now, to let this seep into your mind a little further, I would like to ask you to read this with me from the screen in full voice. 1, 2, 3. Do not grow weary in well-doing, for we shall reap a reward if we do not give up. Using the language of this series, Paul's asking us to stay steadfast in well-doing. Would you stay steadfast in well-doing? Because if you stay steadfast, you will reap a reward from God, and you will be glad at the end of your life that you were steadfast throughout your life in this thing called well-doing. What is well-doing? What does Paul have in mind when he's talking about well-doing? It can be small random acts of kindness throughout your day. It can be the little courtesies that you offer someone else. It can be kind-hearted parenting or grandparenting. It can be service in and around the church as you volunteer and serve. It can be something you do in your neighborhood. It could be a project at work. But the world needs well-doers. And Paul says some well-doers get weary along the way and they bail. And all this well-doing that needs to get done doesn't get done. And he said, would you be a person who would be steadfast in doing all this good that needs to be done? And God will reward you if you stay steadfast in well-doing. I've talked to you before about my dad. He died at 52 years of age, but he lived quite a life. He was a business person. He was a Christian. And he was quite a dominating figure. He was an imposing kind of personality, an adventurer. He flew his own airplanes, sailed a sailboat across the Atlantic Ocean, bought and sold companies, high risk, all that kind of guy. And one thing that never kind of fit with his persona is something he did every single Sunday afternoon for 30 years. He learned that there was a group of mentally disabled elderly women being warehoused in a crummy facility in downtown Kalamazoo. Their families had forgotten about them. No one ever visited them. There were no programs for them. These elderly women were simply hanging out in a terrible space, waiting to die. Okay? So he found that out, and he went down and visited with the administrator of this program, and he said, this is terrible, that nobody cares for these mentally challenged women, and they're just like hanging out till they die. And the administrator says no one's interested in them. And my dad said, well, what if I were to put a 1-hour program together on Sunday afternoons where I could lead them in a little song time and have someone who can teach the Bible give them a 10-minute message at a mental level that maybe they could derive some value. This guy said, anybody who wants to do anything to help these women is fine with me. So my dad would organize this, got piano players and got local pastors and Bible teachers and so, and every Sunday at 1:30, he would set up the chairs and he would greet all of these women, many of whom did not dress fashionably and did not have the social graces, if you know what I mean. And then he would say, what songs do you want to sing? And some old gal would say, what a friend we have in Jesus. And my dad would say to the piano player, let's do that one. And he'd help them sing a few verses of that. He'd do that for about a half hour. And then a guy would give a little message. Then he'd sing a couple more songs. And then he'd stand by the door and mercifully greet every single one of these women. And he would drag me along, and I would sit off to the side thinking, who is this man? Most people think of Harold Heibels in this whole other way, and here he is doing this invisible, behind the scenes. Nobody ever said thank you for him doing it, and he did it for 30 years. He would have done it the rest of his life, but he had a heart attack and died. That had a profound effect on my life, because I watched someone that I deeply respected be steadfast in well-doing all the way to the end. And just as a little boy, I remember thinking, I want to be someone who is steadfast in well-doing, not someone who shows up and does a little stuff here and there and then bails for several years and then gets on the wagon again and then falls off. And so again, that had quite an effect on me. And I've asked myself many times, what was the secret to his steadfastness in well-doing? Before I get into that, I look at you and I see so many of you who have been steadfast in well-doing for decades. And you do it in your neighborhood, you do it at work. You're just someone who does random acts of kindness, and you follow promptings from God. And you serve the poor, and you do all the kinds of things that our church does, and you're steadfast in well-doing. We just graduated 3 elders off our elder board. You know that we have 4-year terms, and so we add a group of elders, and then some elders cycle off every year. And we just cycled off, just had a party last week for the 3 that are cycling off. One is a woman named Doreen, and she has been doing well-doing around this church and in her career and so for almost 40 years. She started with the church in the movie theater days. And when I made my comments about her, I said, hey, Doreen, there's one thing I'm not worried about, is you sitting on the spectator bench when you're done with your 4 years here as an elder, because you've been steadfast in well-doing before you were an elder, and I know you're going to do it after you're an elder. A guy named Mike has been serving in our church for 21 years in senior leadership positions as a volunteer. And I'm not worried about him either, because he's going to be steadfast in well-doing. Another woman is named Kim, who was serving invisibly around our church for 15 years, and then came on and served 4 years as an elder, and now she's going to become a board member for the Willow Creek Association. And see, there are so many people, example after example of people who are steadfast in well-doing. And I want to ask you, are you the kind of person that I'm describing? Where you say, one of the greatest joys and privileges of my life is to be the kind of person who sees good that needs to be done, and I do it joyfully, and I do it steadfastly because of the work of God in me. And I ask you again the question, what is the secret to staying steadfast in well-doing? And for the rest of my time, I'm going to draw pictures for you to help you understand the secret of staying steadfast in well-doing. So the first one is a picture about life management. And I've drawn this picture for you to reflect on before, because I've asked the question, when you are all filled up with good life energy, when your life management skills are all in place, your spiritual practices are working for you, you're good with God, your relationships are on a good note, and so your family, your friends, that's all going well. Your diet, your exercise, your recreation, your other engagements, when you're doing life management in a very effective way and you're filled up, what I have learned is that it's pretty easy to stay steadfast in well-doing, because you're so filled up you can just kind of overflow that spirit of fullness in these well-doing endeavors that cross your path. What we get a little worried about, though, is what if you're only at half tank? And then you start worrying a little bit more about your own depletion rate, and you look at opportunities to do good, and you go, hey, you know what? I've got my own problems. I'm not sure I have any energy to give to anybody else. And if you ever get in the condition that I've been in more than once, if you're ever on empty, you have basically nothing to give. You see all kinds of opportunity for well-doing, and you're just like, excuse me, I'm in a hole so deep, I can't worry about anybody else. I got to fix my own life. The time this occurred to me most dramatically was in the late 80s. Some of you veterans of Willow will remember I went through a real deal in the late 80s. I allowed myself to get completely depleted, so much so that my family said to me, you need to go on a vacation. And I said, where are we going? And they said, no, we're not going. You need to go on a vacation and fix your life. And it was like an intervention. So I went over to our little cottage in Michigan, and I get there, and I should be like excited, right? I have 5 days of solitude to reflect on my life. First thing I noticed is that Lynn did not leave any groceries in the cottage, and I was ticked. Now, I didn't call her, which is a good thing. And then I remembered that the kids had parties there, and I was like, there's no food in I underwrite this whole program, and there's no food in this cottage. I was in a pleasant mood, you see. So I go to the store to pick up some groceries. And I pick up some groceries, and I'm not in a great mood. And I'm going to go back to the cottage, and as I'm converging on the door leading out of the grocery store, I see a guy who I know a little bit from around town who got his legs blown off in Vietnam. So he has to push himself in a wheelchair wherever he goes around the little city. And I'm walking toward the door, and he's walking toward the door at the same time. And you know the thought that occurred to me? I thought, oh, great. Now I got to probably open the door for him. And I opened the door for him, and he thanked me, and I went, put the groceries on the front seat of my car, put my head on the steering wheel, and said, who have I become? Who have I become? When I am more concerned about being inconvenienced for 15 seconds, opening the door for someone, when I'm more concerned about my inconveniencing than I am the condition of his life and a very bleak future because his legs were blown off. Am I still a Christian? Who have I become? And that's when I realized, after a lot of reflection and some Christian counseling, that how you manage your life on a day-to-day basis determines to a large extent if you have the wherewithal, if you have the life energy to do well-doing in a steadfast fashion. Again, I'll go back to my dad. My dad, very busy guy, but he managed his life well. He had spiritual input. He had a lot of friends. He had recreations that kept him alive as a person, and a lot of the risky stuff he went into kept him motivated as an individual. And so my dad lived at a mostly full level. He was kind of up-tempo most of the time, and he had plenty in his life to overflow, to do well-doing consistently. I'm asking you the question, do you? If I asked you right now, what level is your life at because of your life management practices? Are you saying, hey, I'm full to overflowing. It's pretty easy for me. I can see myself staying steadfast and well-doing for a long, long time. Some of you go, hey, I'm not doing so well. There's some stuff I need to get my act together about. Or if some of you are down here where I was, you got a lot of work to do. If you're ever going to be the kind of person who has something to give to those who need for us to give it to them. So when I teach leaders around the world, I say, look, different things are going to happen in your life. You're going to have a broken relationship. You're going to get sick. You're going to get a bad medical report. There's going to be some leakage that's going to tend to deplete your life energy bucket, which is why all of us need these streams of replenishment. This is so important. All of us have to take responsibility for these streams of replenishment that we continue to pour into our lives so that our buckets stay filled so that we can be steadfast well-doers for people who need for us to be. What are your streams of replenishment? Some of you, it's your spiritual practices or your chair time. Some of you, it's time in a small group with good friends. Some of it is recreations that you love that fill you up. Some of it is for me, when I spend time with Henry and Mac, my two grandsons, it fills me up. And other things, boating that I do, sailboat racing and so. But I am responsible to keep these streams of replenishment flowing into my life so that my bucket is full, so that I can overflow and I can stay steadfast in well-doing. Does this make sense to any of you? Does it? You look a little confused. There's a text in the Bible that speaks to this. It's out of Romans 12. And this says, never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor for serving the Lord. What it's saying is this is your responsibility. It's not my responsibility as your pastor to keep your bucket full. It's not your spouse's responsibility. This text says this is something you need to do. You need to keep your spiritual fervor high. You need to keep your bucket full. So as you do this, you're going to find yourself more steadfast in well-doing. Okay, let's move on. There's something else that I've talked to you about over the years that will help you be steadfast in well-doing, and it has to do with spiritual gifts. When you become a Christian, the Bible says, the Holy Spirit distributes spiritual capacities, divine capabilities into your life so that you can become good at something that needs to be done in the church, in the community, or in the world. And there's like 18 or 19 of these spiritual gifts. You've heard me talk about this over the years. Now, what happens is when you identify your spiritual gift and you begin to deploy it, there's such a fluidity in this, there's such a joy in finding your gift and using it that you begin to feel the thrill of God using your life. And when you feel God using your life for something good in the world, you want to repeat that behavior. It helps you stay steadfast in well-doing because you re-experience the thrill of God using your life. So go back to my dad. When it comes to spiritual gifts, his top spiritual gift was leadership. His second was mercy. And his third was giving. Okay? Now you think about this deal that he did with all those elderly women. Okay? When he got the vision for helping those women, his leadership gift came into play. He just went right down to the administrator and said, just clear a lane for me. Because if you'll stay out of my way, I'll handle this whole thing. I'll organize it. I'll get the chairs. I'll get the piano players. I'll get the pastors. He didn't use this language. I'm putting these words in his mouth, but he would have, if he had this language, he would have said, my leadership gift will make the organizing and the pulling of all this easy. Because that's what leaders do. They have visions, they organize, they build teams, and they keep stuff going, okay? The second thing is my dad had a mercy gift. And this was very counterintuitive to his large persona. I think maybe part of it came because he had a mentally challenged brother who had some physical challenges too. And he watched his brother be ridiculed for the early years of his life and on through junior high. And then when he was early in high school, his brother was riding his bike one day and kind of lost control of it and was hit by a car and killed. And I think that did something in my dad's heart, and I think it did something with his spiritual gift of mercy. But my dad, who was a tough business person, treated those very unkempt and unattractive, older, mentally unstable women with such kindness and tenderness that I knew as a boy watching him, that was from God. That was God doing something through him that wasn't natural for him. But because that was a spiritual gift, it energized him. He loved using his gift of leadership and his gift of mercy. His third spiritual gift was a gift of giving. He had the ability, as I've told you before, to earn large amounts of money. He had the joy of living within his means so that he could resource cool kingdom stuff. So when it came time to who's going to buy the chairs and the hymnals, who's going to pay the piano player and the pastor and all that, my dad said, this is easy. I'm not going to raise any money. I'm just going to use my spiritual gift of giving. And he underwrote the whole thing for 30 years. But see, when you're in your spiritual giftedness and you're doing something God has called you to do, it actually energizes you in the doing of it, and so that keeps you steadfast. I've told you before that I have 3 spiritual gifts: leadership, evangelism, and teaching. I've also tried to help you understand that when you're using your top spiritual gift, some of us don't rank order our gifts, and we should. When you're using your top spiritual gift, it actually gives you energy. You can't believe God's using you. You feel the fluid flow of the Holy Spirit through your life. Things come out of your mouth. It's almost recreational, and you get done using that spiritual gift in whatever activity of well-doing it is, and you go, I can't wait to do that again because I'm filled up. Same thing happens maybe to a little lesser degree with your second gift. Your third gift and lower, that might be an energy draw. I don't know. Teaching, as you know, is very hard for me, and it depletes me, actually, which is why if I do too much of it, my bucket gets low. So anyway, find your spiritual gifts, put them into play, rank order them, and use your top 2 or 3 spiritual gifts, for the most part, in well-doing, and you will have this regenerative energy machine working in your life, and that's going to help you stay steadfast in well-doing. Before I move on, don't have to raise your hand. How many of you know your top 3 spiritual gifts? And how many of you know them in rank order? And how many of you are deploying them congruent with the order that God put them in your life? And do you feel this kind of energy such that it makes you want to do it again and again and again? If you go, not so much, well, then you have some work to do. We have a Discover Your Spiritual Gift class starting in a couple weeks. Go to that. You can go online, just Google spiritual gifts. You'll find 8 million posts. And if you Google spiritual gifts and put my name after it, there's like 27,000 posts, because I've spoken about spiritual gifts quite a few times, and people have criticized me for it. And you can read all the junk about it. That I just said that to motivate you to do it, okay? Now, here's another way of looking at this when we're talking about what are the secrets of staying steadfast in well-doing. You've seen me draw this before. This is the Willow Creek swimming pool. And this is after we talk about spiritual gifts, and we say you got to identify your spiritual gift. It's your job. It's not my job. It's your job to identify your gift. Once you get it identified, you're standing out at the end of this diving board, and sooner or later, you must deploy it. You have to take a risk and say, I'm going to use these gifts that God has entrusted to me for some well-doing in my neighborhood, in my church, and my job in the world somewhere, okay? So sooner or later, as I explain it to people, you got to jump into the pool. You just take a jump and you go, maybe I'll use my top spiritual gift in this particular volunteer activity, in this particular ministry endeavor, this challenge at work, whatever, okay? Now the thing is, usually what happens is you do this for a while, and again, a lot of teachers don't want to tell you this, but this is true. Most of the time, your first jump into the pool is a sort of joyful experience, but you find out, oh, wait a minute, maybe I jumped into the wrong endeavor, and maybe this particular group of people that I'm doing this with is not the right team for me to be with. So you hang in there for a while, 2, 3, 4 months, and then what happens? It feels hard. And you get weary in well-doing, and you look at the hard surface next to the swimming pool where all these beach chairs are, and you go, you know what? This has gotten a little difficult, and I'm a little weary. Didn't work out like I thought. I'm going to get out of the pool. I'm just going to lay down on the beach chair for a while, okay? This is what Paul was worried about when he said, if you get weary in well-doing, you're likely to get out of the pool and get out of the well-doing game, and then you'll never get the rewards that God has promised for you. You won't feel the thrill of God using your life, and the well-doing that needs to be done in the world by you doesn't get done. Everybody loses when you get out of the pool. Everybody. So I talk to people all the time around the church here who describe, hey, 6 years ago, I got involved in this, but it didn't work out so well, and so I only did it for 3 or 4 months. I go, this is not new information for me. Often it takes several times of migrating to different parts of the swimming pool before you find something that's really your sweet spot. And then I say, so what'd you do after it didn't go well? They essentially tell me they got out of the pool. And I say, so what are you doing now? And they go, nothing. And again, I don't have a mercy gift, so I can just say whatever I want to say. And so all I say to people, you don't want to stand before God someday and tell him that you spent most of your Christian life on a beach chair while everyone else you knew was doing something important in the pool. And if right now you're being convicted by the Holy Spirit because you're on a beach chair and you've been on one for a long time, I don't care how much scripture you know. I don't care how often you can sing, what a good, good Father. I don't care if you do chair time every single day. If that doesn't all translate at some point in time for you finding your spiritual gift, diving off this board and using that gift for God's glory, for well-doing in this world, I'm not impressed at all with your spirituality. If there isn't an activistic component to it, if it doesn't have, shoe leather on your faith so that you're doing something that needs to be done in the world, call yourself a Christian. I have very little respect for that kind of Christian. Give me someone who doesn't know that much, who can't sing that well, who misses a chair time once in a while, and who's using their spiritual gift and doing well in the world consistently. Now, I would wish for both, of course. But be careful that you're not just a beach chair gal, a beach chair guy talking a good game about your faith, but you've left the pool a long time ago. Get yourself back in the pool. Now, one little nuance to this. Sometimes people will come to me and they'll say, hey, I've been in the pool for 18 years. I've been doing this and I feel restless. And I'll say, hey, restless is not a problem. What's the matter with restless? And I'll say, what do you think's at the root of the restlessness? Are you tired? They'll go, no, I'm filled up. I don't feel tired. And I say, are you using the right spiritual gift? I go, yeah. They go, yeah. And I say, well, why don't you just use it in an entirely different environment? Go on do it at work instead of at church. Do it in the neighborhood. Do it at church in a different department. Whatever. Change the whole environment. They'll say, is that legal? Of course it's legal. So they'll experiment and they'll find a new part of the pool they never thought, they'd enjoy. And then they do enjoy it. And then they catch a fresh wind and they stay steadfast in well-doing for another decade. Maybe that's you. Okay, moving along. I have a story to tell you before I give you the next secret of being steadfast in well-doing. There was a woman who had been to a church in another part of the United States, grown up there, and then she moved to the Chicago area, and she had heard of Willow, and so someone said, you ought to go there, and so she came, and this was in the 80s. And so she talked to me, this would probably have been, in the late 90s or sometime when she talked to me, but she said,